right, I'm gonna get started, at least with the intro portion, and then we'll get to the presentation. So hi everyone, my name is Jess. I am a product marketing manager at apexanalytix, and I will introduce our speakers for today. And I'll also run the Q&A at the end. So just for housekeeping, there is a Q&A button where you can ask your questions. If the speakers see it, or if it's really relevant, I might just jump in and ask the question. If not, I'll definitely get answered at the end of the session. But please feel free to chat in any questions you have at any time in the presentation. We'll definitely get to them towards the end. And today we are talking about risk management, protecting your business, how to navigate the evolving risk landscape. And we have Bertrand Maltaverne, who's a senior analyst at Spend Matters and has a lot of experience. He's been doing this for a long time. So very happy to have him and his expertise today. And then we have Danny Thompson, who is Chief Product Officer, my coworker at apexanalytix. So I will kick it off to Bertrand to get us started.
Thank you, Jessica. Hi, everybody. Happy to be here today. Thank you to the Apex team for the opportunity to be part of this event. And we'll be also introducing and speaking with Danny later. Always a pleasure. So let's get started with this webinar. And first, with the next slide, I just wanted to give a brief introduction of what Spend Matters is. So basically, Spend Matters is an analyst firm. We are specialized in procurement tech, and we provide insights on markets and solutions to providers, to buyers of those solutions, buyers and users of those solutions, investors, and also consulting firms. And the insights we have on solutions and the markets, we deliver them through different channels, like the most visible one being our website and our blog that is available to the general public and also for subscribers, but also through research and bespoke research. Now let's talk really about the topic at hand today, risk management. And basically, I wanted to start by setting the stage. And this first picture, that's a picture that appeared, let's say, a while ago, a month ago, I think, in my social media feed. I don't remember exactly where, but that's not important. And I think to some extent that it perfectly illustrates modern supply chains. I mean, here you have goods moving from one side of the world to the other, Argentina, Thailand, and probably maybe consumed in, I don't know, North America or in Europe where I'm based. And that raises questions around the necessity of doing that first. I mean, you just wonder, is that really necessary? And then if you consider what's going on right now, the COP28 and all these discussions around CO2 emissions and climate change, that's another set of questions. And that's not only that, but my next slide is also introducing the fact that those supply chains with goods moving all over the place, that creates many potential failure points. And this picture illustrates that. It's another story that I believe we all heard about. And to make it more current, I could just mention the Panama Canal with great questions and interrogations around, and increasing concerns actually around, water levels there and the need to reduce capacity. And this is an event, among others, that happen on supply chain, and those events have real consequences, as my next slide illustrates that. This is a quote from the chairman of the board of Mercedes-Benz, and that was when there was the heavily disrupted semiconductor supply chain, and it's just to illustrate the fact that these goods moving all over the place, these global supply chains, the interconnectedness of the supply chain create many failure points. And when there is something happening that has real, tangible financial consequences for companies, they really have real impact in terms of business continuity and finances. And I think that in the last years, I would say that almost every company in the world has been to some extent impacted. And just like my next slide illustrates, there are many other stories, not just around supply chain and goods moving, but around, labor, forced labor, working conditions, sometimes closer to home than you think. cybersecurity, with being a top concern for many organizations. And all these issues are happening, and you have constant flow of news around that. And I cannot really emphasize enough the fact that some of these issues is not related to suppliers that are far, far away in another galaxy or even, but sometimes also very, very close to home. So what does that mean for procurement? And that's basically representing both challenges that you can translate into priorities, and in order to execute, you need to have capabilities. And I think we have to address the fact that it's very complex, and this is why the challenges around that complexity. Risk is really multidimensional. It's more than ever. I've been a buyer for a long time in my past career. Back in the days, I'm talking about more than 20 years ago, and risk management at the time was like getting a DNB, a Dun & Bradstreet rating, just to understand, the financial stability of a company. Now it's no longer enough. So many elements, you have to go deeper and deeper, because risk is not just about the suppliers you buy from, but it could be the suppliers that your suppliers buy from, right? And how the goods move from one supplier to the other until it reaches your door or your warehouse. And it's all very dynamic. What is true today may not be true tomorrow. I mean, there are a lot of changes due to external pressures, regulations, especially in the ESG area. There have been a bunch of regulations put in place in North America and Europe, or more globally. Investors also putting external pressure on companies for them to manage risk and be more resilient and anti-fragile. And obviously, you have pressures due to so-called black swans or unexpected events. So what are the priorities when looking at procurement regarding that? I would say, like, around ESG and risk, I would say that the three I mentioned on that slide, which are carbon management, human rights, and cybersecurity, are the ones that create the more headaches and need to be really urgently tackled, because they participate to create that resiliency I've been talking about, and to some extent anti-fragility of the ecosystem, because it's not just about you being resilient, it's about your suppliers and their suppliers, this whole ecosystem that is interdependent, that needs to be resilient and resist to disruptions. There is the compliance element, obviously. We talked about regulation, and basically some elements in those priorities. It's not just to be compliant to those regulations, but it's also because they are, to some extent, the right things to do for all of us as businesses, as individuals. And I often say that it's no longer about companies being the best in the world, but being the best for the world. And this is why I think those three, carbon management, human rights, and cybersecurity, are to some extent the areas of higher concern and priorities for program organization. And so what do you do now based on that? How do you address those challenges and those priorities? Through capabilities. And when I'm talking about capabilities, it's not just about tools and solutions, it's also about the organization, the process, it's a whole system. But I would say the three I've mentioned here are the most important one, around knowing your supplier, getting the big picture, and creating a risk awareness in everything. So let's look at the first one. What do we mean by knowing your supplier? So it's all about having deep and always up-to-date and trusted information on suppliers, the company we work with. I've also hinted to the fact that it's not just about company level information. You need to go deep in terms of granularity, in terms of the locations, the suppliers of the suppliers, so the tier 2, 3, 4, etc., and also understand the supply and what are the business relationships. It's also about knowing your suppliers, having the ability to have a network-based collaboration to support collaboration within that ecosystem in terms of collecting data, exchanging data, managing corrective actions, incident management, improvement plans, etc. The big picture, it's all about all those dimensions I mentioned before, ESG and risk. There are many, many elements in it, and this is why you need to have a clear picture on all these elements and not just one of them. And obviously, you need to have that picture at different levels, being able to take risk at the more granular level and aggregate that to the higher level. Could be categories, could be your company structure, could be the supplier company structure, so that you always have some kind of control tower in place to understand what's going on and where something is going to happen or is happening. And the risk awareness, I think, is very important. It's really to diffuse and embed ESG and risk to all the processes, because you don't do those things and forget about it when you go to scout for new suppliers, when you're going to qualify suppliers, and source, for example. So everything, all this risk information you have should inform all the processes, all the decisions that procurement is making, because at the end of the day, they are shaping the supply chains and they are shaping tomorrow's world. And as I said, again, capabilities, it's a people, process, and tech, which, talking about technology, leads us to the next slide, which is about more specifically the technology element. And looping back to what I said earlier about spend matters, regarding selecting technology, this is something that can be pretty overwhelming, considering the explosion of solutions on the market, the growth of the providers, and I'm talking about growth not just in terms of staff and revenue, but also capabilities, and obviously the fragmentation. And this is why at Spend Matters, we have developed tools to help organizations assess and understand capabilities in depth of providers in different areas. Risk is one of them. With what you see on the screen here, different tools that we call Insider and Tech Match that allow people to understand capabilities and even compare vendors between them. And regarding Apex, which is on the next slide, is a solution provider that is included in several modules that we cover at Spend Matters, and that we also cover through the different insights I've talked about before, the blog and the writings we do. And we can see here how they compare in terms of supplier management, including risk and carbon management, to the rest of the market, with the ability to see areas where Apex is way above the benchmark in terms of control due to the past and the history of the company, but the evolution in terms of providing a solution to also manage risk and supply chain risk. And even now, carbon management is really interesting, and is providing to the market a very leading capabilities in those areas. And basically, those benchmarks are very interesting for you if you're looking for a solution or understanding the market. But there is more to, the choice of a successful partner, a technology provider, than just the capabilities. And I think one thing that is important is also adoption. And this is why on the next slide, what we have is that customer feedback is for us also beyond what we do as analysts, something very important. And hearing back from the people in the trenches, using the solution, implementing the solution is very, very important. And it's really important to understand the fit and the soft aspects that implementing and using such technology entail around collaboration, expertise, support, etc., and being proactive in the relationship. Because at the end of the day, implementing a solution, it's always an endeavor, and a good relationship with a provider, highlighted here by some of the feedback we have on apexanalytix, is quite important. So that being said, now I will basically hand over to Danny from Apex, so that he can provide you guys with more details on the company and the product. Danny, the floor is yours.
Thanks a lot, Bertrand. And I just want to take a second to say how much we've enjoyed the partnership and relationship with Spend Matters over time. We rely on the Spend Matters research to learn a lot about the market and what different companies are trying to do, what the best-in-class solutions out in the world are doing. And then we use that information to bring more value to our clients, to deliver solutions that are meeting needs that they need resolved. And participation in the whole solution map RFI process, which, as Bertrand said, is deeper than any other analysis we see from any other company, helps us take an honest look at our own solutions and helps us identify areas where we can be providing even more capabilities. So it's been a great experience working with you, Bertrand, and the rest of the team there at Spend Matters. I'd encourage everybody to go check out their website and view research that has to do with the full spectrum of procurement-related problems and solutions. So with that, I'll just take a second for those of you who aren't aware of apexanalytix or maybe don't know a lot about us. I'll just take 1 second to give you a little bit of history on the company, who we are, and why we're talking about supplier risk. You can see from this slide that we have clients. Well, actually, it's about 250 Fortune 500, Fortune 1000, and Global 2000 clients. It's the biggest companies in the world, and we're helping them manage their suppliers in a bunch of different ways. You can see the largest companies in major categories globally are customers of Apex, and those clients are using apexanalytix solutions, whether it's recovery audit services or consulting services, or more and more our supplier management and even customer management software to manage over $9 trillion in spend every year. With that solution, with our solutions, they're either preventing or recovering $8 billion in overpayments every year. Through the process of recovering and preventing overpayments and managing suppliers, Apex has built a database of golden records for suppliers who are doing business with the Fortune 1000, over 90 million suppliers, and the best data we've been able to find about those suppliers in interacting with them, and also tapping over 1,000 external data sources to validate and append information to and gain insights into suppliers. There's more information on this slide. We've been in business since the late 80s, lots of years of really continuous growth over that period of time. And all of our solutions are multilingual, so they're covering the majority of the world. When we think about supplier risk management, working with analysts like Spend Matters and others, and really working with our clients, we have learned that really when you think about risk management, there are 5 major dimensions that you need to be thinking about. First of all, and the different providers in the world are addressing each of these categories in different ways. So when you're evaluating supplier risk management solutions, you should be evaluating each of your providers across all of these dimensions. One is, which categories of compliance and risk are they covering? And what we continue to see is different companies looking at more and more categories and looking to find a single solution where they can bring all of their risk information into a single solution that gives them a complete view of the risk associated with a given supplier. So for example, while cybersecurity might be the most important thing for you to think about in terms of maybe your IT suppliers, it's also important to evaluate those suppliers from a financial stability standpoint, or a reputation standpoint, regulatory, sustainability. All of those are factors that you need to be evaluating related to your IT vendors. And then for your raw material vendors, yes, you should be worried about their capacity and their financial stability, but they too, if they were to become subject to a ransomware attack and their operations were disrupted, you would have to worry about that impact on your overall supply chain. So you need to be thinking about cybersecurity for all of your suppliers, and on and on. So think about the scope of the suppliers, of the risk management solutions that you're dealing with. Second is data sources. Lots of risk management solutions have been built on supplier questionnaires, which have some risk because, first of all, they tend to be point-in-time assessments, and companies are more and more looking for continuous assessments. And they're also often unverified. You're relying on the supplier's word to evaluate the supplier's risk. That's why we see clients wanting more automated ways of evaluating suppliers' risk. And all of these other data sources that are listed here need to be taken into account when you're evaluating risk of a supplier, including things like, are any other companies in our community having issues with a supplier, or are the supplier's suppliers having an issue? Then there's the entire risk management cycle. One complaint that we hear about risk management solutions sometimes is they just flood the client with alerts related to risk or information that's related to risk, but the solution doesn't digest that information, bring their attention to what's important, and then help them remediate the risk that's been identified. So different solutions cover different aspects of the supplier of the risk management lifecycle. You really are looking for a solution that covers the risk management lifecycle from end to end. Then there's the supplier lifecycle. It's one thing to be monitoring and managing risk of your established suppliers, but it's also important to be doing evaluations of supplier compliance and risk when you're just looking for a new supplier, or you're pre-qualifying them or onboarding them. It's better to identify and address issues at that point rather than after you're pretty well entrenched with a supplier that is bringing risk to you. And then lastly, supplier scope. A lot of solutions, because of the level of manual activity that's involved, maybe because of the limited scope of the information that's being captured, narrow the scope of the suppliers that are being evaluated to maybe only the large strategic suppliers. And the problem there is that lots of the risk and compliance issues that you face may be in the middle tier or the long tail of suppliers. Sometimes it's that one supplier that's producing for you a small part that's part of your $75,000 product, that if it goes down or you lose access to it, you lose your whole supply chain. So think about a solution and the scope of suppliers that are included in the solution. We've got this approach at Apex that is every all 100%, where we try to cover the full spectrum of risk and process in all of those 5 categories. Now let's take a minute to talk about supply chain attacks that are cyber related. And one of the statistics that we hear, and the exact statistic varies, somewhere between 30% and 60% of all supply chain disruptions are the result of a cyber attack. So it is essentially the leading cause of supply chain disruption. And that's because, for one thing, we tend to think about cyber attacks as limited to, or cyber security screening as limited to maybe data providers or IT providers. But as we learn from supply chain, there's a lot of other damage that can be the result of a supply chain attack. Let's go to the next slide. One more. So one of the interesting statistics is that on average, it takes your suppliers 277 days to discover a cyber attack. So one has happened, it's 2/3 of a year goes by, and then another 75 days before they contain it. So think about today, if there were a cyber attack that occurred last Valentine's Day, on average, it would be today when most companies would be discovering, or the average company would be discovering, that cyber attack that happened on Valentine's Day. And then they wouldn't have it contained until the beginning of February of next year, almost Valentine's again. So almost a year from the time an attack occurs till the time it's discovered and remediated. What companies are looking for is a way to address these cyber attacks much more closely, either preventing them or as soon as they're in progress, can we identify them and get on them right away. Next slide. And when this happens, the interesting statistics here are that almost every company has had at least one supplier who's had a cyber breach in the last year. Meanwhile, only about 13% of those companies are monitoring their suppliers for cyber risk. So there's this huge need to raise the cyber risk monitoring associated with your supply chains. And those supply chain attacks, cyber attacks, as we've mentioned, can have broad impacts, ESG impacts, financial and credit, geopolitical, information security, operational, regulatory, and maybe as important as regulatory is reputation. If one of your suppliers has a cyber breach and that splashes back on your reputation, then you may end up having a PR problem to deal with. You may also have fines and other regulatory penalties that you have to deal with. So cybersecurity monitoring is a really important risk factor that you need to be thinking about. And the same sort of pattern applies across all risk categories. Every risk category has an ability to splash into other risk areas. To be able to manage cyber risk and monitor cyber risk for your supply base, you need technology that helps you evaluate cyber risk at scale. So you need something that's on an automated basis, monitoring the risk associated with your suppliers, not only their vulnerability to attack due to their public-facing web solutions and whether they're on the latest versions and have the right security measures in place, but also you need the ability to be monitoring or become aware of information that is on the dark web associated with your suppliers. So let's go to the next slide. Earlier this year, Apex acquired a company called Darkbeam that is focused 100% on doing cyber risk assessments at scale. And the risk assessment that Darkbeam performs does at scale on a continuous basis evaluation of the vulnerability of your suppliers to breaches. But they layer it with another level where they have experts in cybersecurity continuously monitoring the dark web to find cases where passwords are being sold, compromising information about board members or beneficial owners, or maybe vulnerability to ransomware attacks. Ransomware attacks that are in progress. All of that monitoring with white hat hackers is going on a continuous basis for your supplier base so that you get immediate notification when there is a ransomware attack in progress or data has been compromised on the dark web. Two pretty important components to that risk assessment. And what Apex has done is taken the Darkbeam risk assessment and folded it into our comprehensive risk management module. And the comprehensive risk management module that has a lot of capabilities, but what we're looking at here is a comprehensive risk assessment of a given supplier. The risk report that's on the right side of the page is the Darkbeam assessment of risk of the supplier, happens in near real time. The data of that from that report comes into the center section of this screen where we have different categories of risk identified. That data, those scores are benchmarked against other companies in the market to understand whether the score is good or bad for the given supplier, and good or bad relative to you and your company's own risk tolerance associated with your supply base. And then the scores that are coming in from Darkbeam get combined with some global media monitoring using AI to identify news reports that suggest a cyber breach or other cyber risk associated with a supplier. Then we fold in cyber risk assessments of this supplier's suppliers as well, to give you an overall assessment of the cyber risk associated with this supplier. And then if you look to the left side of the screen, you can see a consolidated data security risk for this supplier, and then consolidated category risk for a wide variety of other risk categories, the full spectrum of risk. All of these risk scores are then combined into an overall risk score for the supplier as a whole. And in each of these scorecards that are identified on the left, there are additional data inputs similar to the one for cybersecurity risk in all of those 7 categories that we described earlier in the presentation to assess the risk of that given supplier. And here are some examples. At the top left, we're looking at financial risk, which is folding in a D&B credit report, a rapid ratings report, some more media monitoring, looking for indicators of financial risk associated with a supplier, and a financial questionnaire that the supplier has to complete. To the top right, it's a similar assessment around supplier sustainability and compliance with global regulations in the ESG space. And all of similar scorecards are for all of the risk categories. The way the system works is it's continuously monitoring all of these risk categories. And if an individual risk flag, a supplier category score, or a composite score either crosses a threshold or moves in the wrong direction by a configurable amount, then your risk manager gets an alert. And the risk manager can follow that alert into the platform and see all of the details that they need to see to understand the risk that's being presented. And then they have a choice to make. Do they accept the risk, or do they want to do some further investigation, or maybe even interact with the supplier to remediate that risk? And the solution helps them do that by allowing them to create tasks and action items, or they can even launch a full-blown investigation or remediation project where they pull in other internal users, the supplier, and maybe even third parties to help evaluate a risk and come to a conclusion about whether it needs to be mitigated, then set milestones for mitigation, and ultimately decide if the risk is going to be accepted or a new supplier needs to be selected. And information about alternate suppliers is provided in many of the risk assessments that are part of this process. So we support the risk management process from end to end, including identification of risk, monitoring, and remediation. And all of these risk assessments, including the investigations capability, can be pulled into any stage of the supplier lifecycle: supplier discovery, supplier pre-qualification and onboarding, or continuously thereafter. Next slide. I mentioned pulling this process into the earliest stages, supplier discovery and supplier onboarding. And this slide represents what our fully automated supplier onboarding process looks like. When a supplier is registering to become a supplier for you, or even in an earlier pre-qualification stage, the system, when the supplier lands in the solution, they see a pre-populated screen with Apex's golden record for the supplier. So all of the best information that we have about them. And their role at that point is just to review the information that we have provided and make any adjustments that are appropriate for their given buyer-supplier relationship. Maybe a contact that Apex is aware of isn't relevant for a given new buyer they're registering with. So they might need to add a contact or just choose the appropriate contacts. And the same could be true of which addresses they're using to service the customer, which bank accounts they want to be paid to, which tax IDs they want to be used for this relationship. And as the system walks the supplier through the review of all that information and completion of any new fields that may be required by the customer, the system in real time hits our external data sources to either validate or enrich the information that the supplier is providing. So things like legal name and tax ID and entity type get bumped against the tax authorities for countries around the world to make sure that we've got all of that information correct. Once we know we have the right legal name and the supplier enters a bank account, we can now bounce that legal name and bank account against the banking system. And the exact solution varies from country to country. Some countries, it's a government institution. Sometimes it's a service provider, and sometimes it's a consortium of banks who will then say, yes, that's the legal owner of that bank account. You can feel confident making any payments to that bank account. Or they'll say, we've never seen that bank account before, or somebody else owns that bank account. Or they'll say, we don't cover that bank, in which case other controls will click in. And those are some good examples of what happens. The supplier walks through the entire process, and when they're completed with all of the validations and providing all of the information that they need, there's an intelligent workflow that kicks in that routes the supplier's profile to all of the appropriate approvers inside the company. And when the profile is approved, then a fully formed vendor master record gets created inside the ERP or multiple ERPs, and business can begin with that supplier who's been fully vetted. Now, this slide talks about bank account change controls, and I mentioned it a little bit on the previous slide. As you all know, payment fraud is a huge problem, and it really skyrocketed over the COVID years because the fraudsters got really good at business email compromise and interjecting themselves into conversations between buyers and suppliers when large dollar payments were about to be made. The fraudsters would, right at the right moment, request a bank account change and would be positioned to be able to respond to phone calls and email confirmations to verify the bank account for the buyer. Buyers would make the payment to the wrong account and only later would find out that a fraud had been committed. And so inside our supplier portal, and even independently as an API, if you'd rather use it that way, Apex has built a very comprehensive bank account change control process. And it starts out with robust access controls. Our clients don't allow bank account changes or really any vendor master changes to come through any channel other than their secure supplier portal. And the security around that supplier portal is as tight as a bank's. There's, of course, password reset rules, multi-factor authentication, IP address monitoring, user behavior monitoring to make sure that activities are happening during normal business hours for the supplier. And if not, alerts get raised. There are really complex bank account change controls. For example, you need to know what the bank account that you were using previously in order to change the bank account, and other controls around that, security questions, et cetera. Then in 4 countries around the world so far, and we have 4 more coming online, we expect by the end of the year, we have integration to go get the positive confirmation from the banking system or the government of the legal owner of the bank account. So that once you get that confirmation, you can feel rock solid that your bank account change is valid. And our clients tell us they have never had a fraud when they receive that sort of confirmation. And then to cover the rest of the banks around the world, countries that aren't offering this positive confirmation, or aren't offering aren't offering positive confirmation, or for the banks within given countries that aren't offering that. We add to this whole control process our own bank account confidence scoring. So I mentioned we had 90 million suppliers in our Smart VM database. And for many of them, we know which bank account they're being paid to. And so if a user is coming in to change a bank account for one of our customers, we can look and see if that same bank account is being used by other customers to pay that supplier. And we anonymize that data, but if someone else is using that same bank account, then our client can feel confident that or more confident that the bank account change is valid, especially if that bank account has been used over multiple years by multiple clients. Now, if nobody else is using that bank account to pay the supplier, then our clients know they have some more due diligence to do around that bank account change before they accept it into their environment. A couple of other changes that are coming in this space, just really huge advancements in the security of bank account changes, is we are introducing passwordless access, where there is no user ID and password for the supplier. Instead, the supplier authenticates through their registered device who they are. So when they come to the website, they scan a QR code, and the system on their phone sends a message on the back end to the portal to let the portal know who this supplier is, what their user ID is, and what their role is. And those credentials can't be stolen through business email compromise. And another really cool advancement, since we have since acquired this cyber risk assessment company, Darkbeam, we can now scour the dark web for any credentials to any of our clients' Apex portals to see if any suppliers have given up their credentials through phishing attacks, and where those credentials are now being sold or made available on the dark web. And when we discover that, we can now block that user's account and identify if any bank account change requests have come in through recently for that supplier, since the data has been compromised, and if so, raise an alert to the client. First, that the supplier's ID has been compromised on the dark web, so there may need to be a communication with the supplier. We're certainly going to require the supplier to re-authenticate. And to the extent that there has been a bank account change recently, then more due diligence will be made for any open, we can put any open invoices on hold, and then look at invoices that have been paid recently to see if we need to get those clawed back. So those are some really cool advancements in the area of bank account risk that we're addressing. Okay, move to the next slide. I think that's all I'll just proactively provide. In short, how we recommend that you navigate the evolving risk landscape is get a really comprehensive view of potential threats by covering all risk categories, all data sources, and all of your third-party relationships. Try to incorporate this compliance and risk management as early as possible in the supplier lifecycle, discovery and pre-qualification and onboarding, and then use technology to automate the end-to-end risk management process, from collecting that data automatically for you, evaluating it, and then raising alerts to you and your risk managers, really only when there's something that they need to pay attention to. You don't want them to have to go and review dashboards every day. You want them to be alerted to when there's a meaningful risk that they need to address. And then look for a solution that's going to help you automate the interventions as much as possible. For example, you want a solution that can reach and put suppliers on hold automatically, or invoices or payments on hold automatically where appropriate, or just trigger alerts and follow-up activities when a human interaction is required, just to make sure that none of these risks fall through the cracks. I think that's it. I think we'll open the floor up to Q&A at this point. Have any questions come in, Jess?
Yeah, we do have, we do have a few questions. One is that risk management seems like it's going to be a journey for someone who says that their company doesn't monitor risk currently for their suppliers. Where would you suggest that they get started? Where is the starting point? If they had to prioritize where to get started, how would they do that?
Well, I think the first thing that any company needs to do is identify what risks are important to them. And sometimes those risks are identified by reaction to an incident. So we see a lot of companies experience a fraud, and that starts them on this journey, or they experience a cyber attack on one of their customers. And if that's the case, then of course you need to close up those known gaps right away. And then I would follow that pretty quickly with a review of the broad spectrum risk and decide what level of monitoring and management you want to or you want to take on as a first step. Bertrand, how would you answer this question?
Just like you did. No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah,
no, obviously, no, but I would say, like, start with good data, because it's sometimes also a quick win. You may have duplicate records in your system for the same supplier with different bank accounts. People get confused, they hear or whatever. So I would say the low-hanging fruit, I would say it start with data and having good controls around data. Because for many organizations, obviously it depends on where you're starting, but it's already a quick way to find, duplicate payments and address some risk factors. And I think one of the benefits around what you heard from Danny is to say that here you come with a list of suppliers and really have in Apex, because of the solution, but because of also the services and all the work they do beyond tech, they maintain golden records on millions of companies. So that means that, I'm working with a supplier called XYZ, then probably it's there, and you already have a bunch of data that's been pre-qualified, vetted, et cetera. So you can kind of have a high confidence and stuff. And then for suppliers, it's also a benefit, because if they maintain a record on the network, then anyone using them or wanting to use them can use that data, and it's only one point to update. So I think it's where I would start really as the first initial step.
That's a great point, Bertrand, because we see one of the major causes of overpayments is cases where there are duplicate vendor records. And the same would apply to, you may be doing spend analytics to figure out who your most impactful suppliers are, or your highest spend suppliers. And if you've got multiple vendor masters, that can really compromise your spend analytics. Yeah, great point.
Thanks, guys. There's another one that's a really great question. So smaller suppliers, individual contractors, they're beginning to push back on creating accounts for all these different portals, right? Having to sign on to different supplier portal solutions. How are you responding to this pushback in the supplier community, particularly those who are hesitant to provide sensitive personal information to a third party that they're not doing business with directly?
Yeah, I can just think right off the top of my head, 3 ways that we're addressing that. One is we try to evaluate a risk as much as possible without requiring supplier input. So we look for data that we already have, or that we can find in other places about that supplier, who they are, and what the risks are, so that the data requirements that are or information requirements associated with the supplier are minimal. And then another way we address this is all of our supplier portals are white labeled for the clients. So a supplier is logging into a Disney portal or a JP Morgan Chase portal or a Verizon portal rather than an apexanalytix portal. And that adds a lot of integrity and confidence in the supplier that they're sharing information with the people they intend to share information to. But we are giving suppliers a new capability to be able to seamlessly navigate between those environments and get a centralized visibility to the information that is associated with all of their various suppliers in their various customers in one place. And then maybe a third way we do it is carrying on with the principle of good software is easy to use, great software doesn't require users. And for the most part, what we try to do is give a supplier an experience where they don't have to go to a portal to interact. If they want to know what their dynamic discount opportunities are, we push that information to them. If there's a risk concern, like we've detected that their insurance coverage isn't meeting the client's needs, then we automate an email to their insurance carrier and to them, or I'm sorry, their insurance agent and to them, notifying them of the issue and giving them the opportunity to resolve it without ever having to log into the Apex. So those are other things that we try to do to just try and make it as easy as possible on the supplier. One important thing to remember, though, is there is not one right answer for what a supplier profile should be or what a supplier risk assessment should be that is applicable to every customer. The contacts, bank accounts, tax IDs that are appropriate to a given supplier and buyer relationship are often unique. The strategies and risk tolerances of different buyers varies, and so the way they weight different risk factors can be very different. And the strategic programs that they want the supplier to be engaged in and other edge systems they want the supplier to be interacting with vary from buyer to buyer. And so that's why we really think there's not a one-size-fits-all solution for that would allow a supplier to go one place and create one profile for everybody. There's going to be a step where they're saying which of my data is applicable to a given buyer relationship.
All right, those were the questions. I don't know if anyone else has any to type into the chat.
Right.
If not.
Well, maybe a final thing, maybe just a question I'll lob at Bertrand. We get a lot of questions these days about generative AI and its impact on the risk world. And we're certainly introducing we already have some AI in the product. We're adding generative AI. What's your quick assessment on that?
Oh God, Gen AI. We're writing on it. I mean, everybody's talking about it. Like, it reminds me of blockchain a few years ago, like. Sure. But yeah, no, I think like in procurement and supply chain management, there are a lot of use cases for what I would call traditional AI, more than Gen AI, if you compare that to some other business function, like, creative, like marketing and stuff. But I think Gen AI makes sense in specific use cases and especially around understanding language and that kind of stuff. So I know there is already AI to process news and that kind of stuff, but I think Gen AI can be a next level type of stuff, and also can be a good source to some extent to gather intelligence outside it the markets and directions and things like that. And I think it can be also a very good complement to traditional AI to bring that, I'm using end quote here, human touch in the user interaction. And you talked about suppliers before, and it's also valid for buyers, but I would say for any user, a chatbot for support where you can really interact in a better way than the chatbot from the past. Like when Siri came and Alexa, whatever, I had written an article a long time ago that's like, it's not 10 years ago, but with that first generation of chatbots, where we were all envisioning those chatbots where you could chat with them, et cetera, but they were very, very limited. And now with Gen AI, you have new possibilities, and that can facilitate a lot of stuff in terms of interaction with the system for adoption, like we talked about it, and you, Danny, also talked about it on the supplier side of things. And I think that can be also very valuable in that role. And it can be also very valuable for the users to talk to the data and talk to the app instead of relying on dashboards and that kind of stuff. So in a nutshell, some use cases, but yeah.
Yeah, that's great. Great insight. I think everybody's familiar with the fact that you can't quite trust the AI to give you an honest answer yet. But if you're looking for something that's going to help you generate ideas, and you just have to know that the information that you're getting may or may not be true, but can be directionally accurate sometimes. And of course, there'll continue to be a lot of work to lock that down over time. Thanks a lot, Bertrand.
For sure. Trust, but verify for the AI and for suppliers.
Yeah, for sure. All right.
I think that is all for our webinar today. I want to thank Danny and Bertrand for signing on, and for those who asked questions in the chat. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks a lot. See you later, Bertrand.
See you. Thanks for all.
Guys.
Have a good day.